contractor's first year in Pakistan had been spent organizing facilities, equipment, and manpower. But even before the first year was out, construction was underway on the dam itself. The river had to be diverted at the end of the monsoon season to allow time to raise the dam high enough to withstand the annual spring floods. The schedule called for diversion by September 1965, a deadline now only 36 months away. In order to meet that deadline, a number of projects had to be well underway. At the diversion site, 8 million cubic yards of material was being torn away from the cliff face. Only a thin rib of rock and earth would be left as a cofferdam to hold the river out of the work site at the mouth of the tunnels. At the downstream end of the tunnels, the powerhouse area was being excavated in preparation for the pouring of foundations. Below that, work on the tail race was getting underway. But diversion didn't depend just on this. The base of the main embankment had to be excavated to foundation, and the first clay laid in that would form the impervious core of the main dam. This clay for the core, although readily available, required special treatment. Because it was so heavily compacted, a great deal of time was required to break the clay down so that it could be laid for the core. Disking, watering, grading, and more disking went on until the clay was finally of proper consistency. 12 miles away, similar work was underway on the Jari Dam. Overshadowed by the larger Mangla Dam, Jari was still a project of considerable size, running over a mile in length and topping out at a height of 234 feet. Before long, the main embankment began to take shape. Plans called for it to be brought to a height of 223 feet, along 10,000 of its 11,000-foot length. A 1,000-foot gap would be left at one end below the old fort. The Jhelum River would continue to flow through here until diversion. The zones and layers of controlled materials for the main dam would consist of rolled sandstone and clay mixtures, rolled clay for the core, washed gravel, and riprap for the exterior surfaces. A series of drainage wells would be placed along the dam's entire length. At the tunnel intake site, excavation had laid the mountain bare, and the largest tunneling mole ever built began boring its way through the face of the exposed cliff. The mole was untried. No one was yet totally sure it would do the job. And at first, results were disappointing. Extreme stresses caused jamming. Cave-ins often meant more hours clearing and changing the cutters than were spent tunneling. If the problems couldn't be corrected, diversion date might have to be put off. And that would mean an extra year of construction, a 20% lengthening of job time, and millions more in costs. On-the-spot refinements and adaptations were made. The mole's cutting surfaces were improved, and the hydraulic pressure pushing the cutting head against the rock was increased. It had taken 90 days to bore the first tunnel. The second was cut through in half that time, sometimes making good as much as 105 feet a day. As the mole dug forward, crews followed behind, shoring up the ceiling to prevent cave-ins. After them came the concrete crews, lining the tunnels so they could withstand the erosion and pressure of the millions of gallons of water that would race through on its way around the construction site. Further strength was supplied by steel tunnel liners. 30 feet in diameter and 30 feet long, these huge segments were fabricated on the job, loaded on trucks and transported to the tunnel site, where they were set in the tunnels and welded in place. At the intake area, the tunnel portals were poured and the control gates were installed. When open, these gates would allow water to pass into the diversion tunnels. When closed, the impounded waters would form the lake. At the downstream end of the tunnels, other crews were hard at work laying the foundations for the powerhouse. Initially, 3 generators would be tied into the tunnels. Water stored behind the new dam would pass through the tunnels to spin the rotors that would create 300,000 kilowatts of electricity. Ultimately, Mangla would be able to generate a full 1,000,000 kilowatts of power from 10 generators. The months of organization that preceded were paying off. On a job where literally thousands of things were happening at once, every situation was under direct control and observation. Availability of men and materials, cost control, equipment at the right place at the right time. Work was carefully watched and directed from every management level. The constant challenge at this stage was the approaching deadline of diversion date. Field men moved back and forth between their specific jobs on the site and the main office, checking and double-checking each of the details that was a part of the complex job. They pitched in whenever needed to lend an extra hand. It went like this until it was the fall of 1965. Then, less than a month before diversion with everything on schedule, Pakistan went to war. The battlefront less than 50 miles away. The workforce reduced by a third. Mangla Dam contractors waited for word from the government on whether or not to proceed with closure. In the meantime, all preliminary work continued as though closure would take place. The rib between the river and the tunnels was cleared. Diversion time was now. If not now, work would have to be delayed a full year. At last, the decision came. Diversion of the Jhelum at Mangla must proceed. Almost 5 years to the day from the signing of the Indus Water Treaty, the course of the Jhelum River was turned through the tunnels and the riverbed ran dry. Now work crews could move into the riverbed gap at the main dam site and begin to excavate to foundation. Diversion had been one of the key dates on the job. Everything to this point had focused on that one event. Now there was a shift of emphasis. The entire purpose of all work from now on was to get each part of the job finished as quickly as possible. Maximum efficiency was the keynote of the entire Mangla operation. And to keep things running at that rate meant thousands of spare parts carefully stored, their location and quantity filed and cross-indexed to assure ready availability. Because of the remoteness of the job, It was necessary to stockpile everything from carburetor jets to automatic transmissions to complete engines. 1,200 mechanics, most of them trained on the job, kept everything running. But you can only repair and replace for so long. Eventually, a complete overhaul is required. Crankshafts had to be reground. Diesel engines had to be stripped apart and reconditioned. The hard surface metal was replaced on tractor rollers. When you're 3 months away from your nearest source of supply, the simpler you can make life, the better. For all of this, the equipment and the people who could do the job were at Mangla. When you've got 13,000 workmen on a job, communications is a problem. When they speak different languages, it can be even more of a problem. As the job at Mangla became more complex, so did the lives of the people. Basic safety practices had been emphasized from the beginning. A fully equipped fire department was on duty continuously. It served both the job site and the community. Emergency ambulances were stationed at key points, ready to aid injured personnel or speed them to the hospital for medical attention. The modern 80-bed hospital was fully equipped and staffed. Here, all medical problems could be handled, from the routine matters of minor home and job accidents to major surgery. A hospital isn't the only place where proper diet is essential. Realizing this, the contractor established a 25-acre food farm. Poultry, eggs, fresh produce, from bananas to corn, to okra, to lettuce and melons. Practically everything was grown at the farm, which supplied fresh produce to the labor camps and to the Baral Colony supermarket. Sometimes you want more than groceries, and the supermarket was just part of the complete shopping facility at Mangla. The colony was by now a thriving town with 500 homes and bachelor quarters for 110. The key personnel the contractor had brought here were a long way from the States. But in this case, they were about as close to home as they could be and still be 9,000 miles away. Because of the duration of the project, families would spend at least 30 months at the job site. Some of them would remain throughout the entire job. The town resembled a modern American community, complete with all the activities of suburbia. It may seem an extravagance to create a small-town USA in the desert of Pakistan, but the colony proved to be a most economical expenditure. The International Elementary School was complete from playground to PTA. Just because they were a long way from home didn't keep the kids from acting like they always do.
Now, the next very important thing that you've got to have done is what? Not the plumbing boy. Who's the one that's going to come along and do the plumbing?
Students in the high school had a full and complete curriculum. With a diploma from the high school, a graduating senior was prepared to qualify for admission to any American university or college. A special section of the school library served the community as well. But it wasn't all work. Recreation facilities were abundant, including 2 swimming pools, one of Olympic size. And there was recreation for the adults, too. Golf